Okay, Bill Simpich is an attorney and anti-war activist. He's been practicing law for 35 years now. He's worked on several important political cases. He's been in court against both the FBI and the CIA, against the FBI in a case where two political activists were the victims of a car bombing, and against the CIA for their involvement in Contra drug trafficking. He's been involved in cases against the Bush administrations for their civil liberties clampdown, and he's worked on cases of police shootings in the Bay Area. He's also worked more recently to make sure votes were counted properly in the California Democratic primary. He's written on political assassinations in the 60s, such as the murders of Black Panther leaders Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, CIA attempts on the life of Fidel Castro, and on the assassination of John Kennedy, about which he's written a book called State Secret and a series of articles called The 12 Who Built the Oswald Legend. So thank you, Bill, for talking. We're going to talk tonight about the Tippit case. We're going to focus on that because you made a very, very interesting talk at the Assassination Archives and Research Center conference on the Warren Commission report in 2014. So I thought you know a lot about that. I thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the Tippit story. Quite a saga.
Yeah, it really is. Do you want to give us kind of the lay of the land and explain the basic story to us? There's a bunch of really interesting points that you have about Officer Westbrook of the Dallas Police, but the two wallets. But maybe you can kind of give us the overview of things, and then we can kind of dig into some of the individual issues.
Sounds good. In a nutshell, the Tippit case has never been properly investigated. They say that about the Kennedy case, and they're right. But this one is a whole other level of confusion. I think, frankly, much of it is because it happened in Dallas. Dallas police are powerful, and were cowboys then, certainly, and I can't speak about them now. But I think people were genuinely scared to even talk about the efficacy of their investigation. And the overview I would offer is that to understand the Kennedy assassination, the best place, I think, to dig in is between 12:30 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Because that's the period where Oswald's movements and Tippit's movements are highly contested. And I would suggest there's a reason why. Because what happens during that period of time is nothing short of a incredible series of chases. And the question that I pose is whether or not anybody fired from the sixth floor at all, and certainly whether Oswald fired from the sixth floor. I'm willing to believe that people posed with guns. I'm not convinced anybody fired a gun out from that floor, and I certainly don't believe that Oswald was one of them. And then the drama moves to where he lives, which was over in Oak Cliff. Now, if you're ever in Dallas, you take a look at the map, you go, gosh, where Oswald lived was miles away from Oak Cliff, from the sixth floor. But the wrinkle is that you can get from downtown Dallas to the Oak Cliff neighborhood in less than 5 minutes. Then and now, because there's a big old highway that just goes boom right from the area of the depository. And that's what's kind of crazy about it, is because there's a river that called the Trinity River that separates the Dallas proper from the immediate suburbs such as Oak Cliff. And it's a big river valley, if you will. And the way you cross it is on a highway. They literally call it a viaduct. You're crossing over the water. And that's where Tippit was parked. Did you know that? Well, right at the end of the viaduct as you enter into Oak Cliff. And Tippit was it had his car parked right at a gas station, right where you get off the viaduct and enter Oak Cliff proper.
Okay.
And for the life of me, this is where things really kind of stall in the investigation of the assassination, as far as I'm concerned. Because Bill Turner, who just passed away recently, William Turner, was an ex-FBI agent who dove into this case as soon as it happened. And he worked this case and other cases like the RFK case for many years. He worked with Jim Garrison, you name it. And Hoover hated him. He hated Hoover. They had a part in the ways before the assassination. Turner interviewed 5 people who either worked at the gas station or lived around that neck of the woods. And they knew, and several of them knew Tippit. They knew who the cop was. That was not the first time he had parked his car to use it as a lookout. And that's what I believe he was doing that day. He was looking for Oswald. And in fact, Joe McBride, who wrote, I think, the best book on the subject recently, interviewed Tippit's father before he passed away. And Tippit's father told the writer that Tippit's father, was told by a Dallas cop or more that, in fact, Tippit was looking for Oswald that day. I mean, that's quite a thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is before Oswald was captured. This is before anybody knew his identity. Why was Tippit looking for Oswald? So that's amazing information.
Now,
amazing information.
Who said that Tippit was looking for Oswald?
Tippit's father. Tippit's father told Joe McBride, the author of this incredible book on Tippit called Into the Nightmare. And McBride spent about 30 years investigating this case. And this is what he was told from Tippit's own father before he passed away.
Wow.
That Tippit, in fact, was looking for Oswald at the time that he died. Now, did Tippit and Oswald ever meet? I'll say right now, I don't think so. I don't think they ever met. I think what happened next is a case of mistaken identity at the very best, and collusion and fraud at the worst. Because here's what happened next. If I can take it kind of slow, I think that's the best way to do this. What happened next was that Tippit abruptly left the gas station. And either he never saw Oswald go by or he saw him go by and lost him. Because he pulled over a fella named Andrews and he made him stop his car and he questioned him for a minute. He ran inside the Top 10 record store. And I've been in that. I've chatted with the people at the Top 10. And the old phone that was in there is still there today. Tippit ran inside, used the phone. Wasn't the first time he had done that. And then ran out again. Oswald, curiously enough, was seen inside that record store earlier that day, like that morning. Either Oswald or somebody looking a lot like him. And so there's some kind of game afoot here. Here's a cop who's running in there. Can't only stays on the phone for a few seconds. Might have gotten word from somebody, might not have, and runs out again. In any case, Tippit's going full throttle, and then he pulls over to the side of 10th Street, and a man who's walking down the street walks over to his car, Tippit's car, and speaks to him. But he speaks to him through the wing window. Tippit doesn't even roll down the window. And there's an extra policeman's uniform shirt hanging in the car. What's that for? Nobody knows. In any case, at some point, Tippit gets out of the car, and he's walking towards the front of the car to come around to the man, apparently. But he doesn't get any farther than the front of the car because the man pulls out a pistol, and he shoots him 1, 2, 3 times. Tippit's on the ground. He steps over Tippit and delivers a coup de grace shot to his head. I would suggest that is the mark of a trained operative, which Oswald was not. He got hit with all the bullets, and he made sure he killed the man with a 4th shot, directly to the head. That's not an act of somebody who's not anything but got cold blood in their veins. Then the next thing that happens is equally fast. The man who does the shooting reloads his pistol on the spot and scatters the shells on the ground. Now, I can understand maybe needing to reload. I don't know that I'd do it there, and let people have a better look at it. Okay?
All right.
And I certainly don't understand why you would leave the shells, the best evidence of the shooting that would match the bullets, right?
Right.
And then he starts to run away. Then and only then does he start to run away. So now he's sprinkled the scene with the shells that would be the best evidence of the killing. The shooter then jogs away. 1 or 2 people try to follow him. They're unsuccessful. There's a merry chase with lots of Dallas cops who come on the scene. And what I should point out at this juncture is at the inception of the cops coming on the scene, the first cop who arrives is a fellow named Kenneth Croy. Kenneth Croy is in plainclothes. And yet, somebody unknown walks up to him and says, I found this at the scene, and it's a wallet. And the wallet's got the ID of Oswald and someone named Alex Fidel. Croy says he has no idea who the witness was. Well, I think, frankly, that Croy was in on the whole thing because you'll see why in a minute. This is where the 2 wallet thing comes into bold relief. More officers come on the scene. Croy's boss, Sergeant Owens, and a fellow who really should not be on the scene at all, the fellow who's head of personnel, a fellow named Captain Pinky Westbrook. Westbrook had been the head of personnel for many years. He's also in plainclothes, by the way. He's giving orders while in plainclothes. And so Westbrook is a curious case because he had access to all of the personnel files of all of the Dallas police. So he's in a position of great power. And he's also the head of internal affairs. He's the one who decides whether somebody is brought up on disciplinary charges as well. So in terms of hiring, firing, disciplinary, you name it, and access to people's most, private information, he's got it all. And his second in command that month is a guy who's recently been transferred his department, a fellow named Jerry Hill. Jerry Hill is an officer who was in the TV business before he became a police officer.
In the TV business?
Television. And he was a reporter. So he knows public relations. He knows how to communicate with the public. And Jerry Hill and Westbrook are on all the scenes of this assassination. Jerry Hill runs up to the 6th floor within minutes after the shooting And he's the one who magically discovers the shells and the paper bag on the scene. The paper bag, there's no photograph of this paper bag at all. The shells are cold. They find a gun. The gun is cold. Nobody ever tests the gun to see if it's been shot recently. All signs, and I mentioned this at length, my belief is I don't think this gun was fired at all that day.
Now you're talking about the rifle?
The rifle they found. And the same is true with the revolver that they eventually found on Oswald. I'll get to that in a moment. But Jerry Hill runs from the scene at the depository, and then he's helping Westbrook look for shells. And he's the one who finds the shells, and he's the one who Then he and Westbrook wind up running off to the theater. But before they get to the theater, I want to return to the scene of the crime, because they've taken Tippit's body away. They've got this wallet that appeared from nowhere. All the witnesses who were right on the scene at the time of Tippit's shooting and immediately afterwards said they never saw a wallet up there. So where did this wallet come from? It came from the sky. It was delivered to the scene. And a fellow named Bob Barrett, who's still alive, an FBI man, he was interviewed on television not that long ago. And he says that Westbrook turned to him and said, "You ever heard of a guy named Lee Oswald?" And then he said, "You ever heard of a guy named Alex Siddell?" He said no and no to both those things. And he's looking through the wallet, and you can actually see the wallet. It's filmed and on television. You can see Westbrook pawing through this wallet. You can't read the Oswald Siddell stuff, but you've got this FBI man's word for it, that's what he was told. And then they got a call all of a sudden saying, "You should come out to the theater. We got somebody in the theater." And so Westbrook runs to the theater scene, and he takes charge. Meanwhile, Jerry Hill and his buddies go up to the balcony. And they are there to make the pinch. And so they come storming to the balcony, and there's a lot of school kids up there, and there's a wild fracas. But meanwhile, they see somebody downstairs, some other cops, Westbrook's staff, see somebody downstairs, and that's the Oswald that we know. And apparently what happened was this. This fellow named Johnny Brewer, a shoe salesman, said he saw somebody hiding in the shadows, and then went running into the theater. And from the door they went into, the only place they could get into was the balcony. And then the gal who was ticket taker called the cops at Johnny Brewer's behest and said somebody came running in here. And so all of a sudden you got 25 cops in the theater. How did 25 cops come to the theater just because one guy's hiding in a balcony or ran into a theater? I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense that they were so certain that this was the right guy, but they were, and that's what they did.
All right.
And in any case, what's so strange about it is that a couple things. One is Hill and all of his buddies went storming down the balcony so fast that two of them had sprained ankles by the time they got down to the bottom. The Oswald, meanwhile, jumped up and said, "This is it," and allegedly pulled a revolver out of from his waistband. Okay, and he may have done that. He may not have done that. I'm not sure which way that goes. What I am sure about is a couple things. One is that there's a couple reports saying that Oswald was taken out of the balcony, which is not true. He was actually taken out the front door. And there's also an eyewitness who for 25 years, the man who worked in the area, said he saw Oswald being taken out from the fire escape in the back. And only in the 90s did he learn that Oswald was taken out to front. And I think what happened was the real Oswald was in the theater the whole time, waiting for some kind of information from wherever he was getting information from. And then their second guy drew attention to Oswald, somebody who looked a lot like him, by, forcing his way into the theater without paint and being very obvious. And that's what brought the police around. And so I think there was somebody who was impersonating Oswald that got taken out the back. I think there was confusion on the cops' side. I think they were expecting to seize Oswald from the back and kill him at that time, because he almost got himself killed downstairs. But he kept screaming police brutality and this and that. And he may have even pulled out the gun himself, because he punched the officer right in the face and got into a clinch with him. So it would have been very hard to kill him because it was all in close quarters.
Now, was it full of? Were there a lot of people? Just a lot of regular people attending the movie.
There's nobody in the theater. There's about 20 people in the theater, and to top it off, Westbrook told one of the fellas, okay, make a list of all the people in the theater so we can interview them. And the guy promptly lost the list. So we only have like 2 witnesses from inside the theater, maybe 3. One of the guys who worked there, and 2 people who were sitting there. The guy who worked there, a guy named Butch Burroughs, said he sold popcorn to Oswald right about 1 o'clock, which was before Tippit even got shot. And another fellow named Jack Davis said he was sitting next to Oswald during the beginning credits of the theater, of the showing of the movie, which was at 1:15, which was right moments after Tippit got shot. So I don't think, quite frankly, that that Oswald was anywhere near the Tippit scene, ever. I think it was somebody else. And then attention was brought to everybody's attention to draw the police to the theater where Oswald was.
Now, do we know?
That's what I think happened.
No, sorry. But I was just going to, you said 25 cops went into the theater. We know that kind of most of the cops were supposed to have been in Dealey Plaza. Where did this whole big gang of cops come from? Do we know? Were they kind of...
They almost run into the Tippit scene shortly after 1 o'clock. Remember, the assassination at 12:30. They all come running to the Tippit scene after 1 o'clock, and with good reason. I mean, a fellow cop has been shot dead. To them, to a man, and I do mean a man, because there's very few women in the department, they'll tell you that they were more upset by the Tippit shooting than they were by the Kennedy shooting. I mean, it may be a national and a worldwide tragedy, but for them, it's a brother officer gone down. And I would posit that the Tippit shooting is certainly something that motivated the department to do whatever they had to do to make sure that the man they caught was going to be the man who went down for it. I mean, now there's no division of the cops' eyes about, who the guilty party is at this point. Who the guy who shot their officer is the guilty party. And as far as they're concerned, that guy is Oswald. And so that's the end of the story. Oswald was indicted for the Tippit murder before he was indicted for the Kennedy murder.
Right.
And that's the way that played out. So, and so the worst of it here is they picked up Oswald, right? And 5 cops and Oswald jammed themselves inside the car. Now, what do they reach inside Oswald's pocket? What do they supposedly find? A wallet. And the wallet supposedly has, again, Oswald ID and Hidell ID. Now there's 2 wallets, right? And this Hidell ID is very important because this Hidell ID was used to match with the gun, the rifle. By the morning of the next day, they got word from Chicago that a rifle was purchased from a mail order place there. They could track the mail order all the way to the Dallas post office, where all of a sudden they can't ever make sure that it was actually delivered there or that anybody ever picked it up. But, it's a mail-ordered rifle ordered under the name of Al Hidell. And for people like my parents, this is the final proof that Oswald was the person who shot the president, and the story was over.
Mm.
Because although you didn't have a photo ID and you didn't have an eyewitness, you've got a mail-ordered rifle ordered in the name of the alias of Oswald. And, it's clear Alex Adele was his alias. It's clear that Oswald was a photographer and it had some fun making a fake draft card with photo on it, which didn't exist, that said Alex Adele on it. All that was pretty clear. The thing that's not so clear, of course, is why would you carry ID like that to an assassination?
And you were saying there was one ID that was Oswald and one ID that was Heidel, both in the wallet.
Right. And to top it off, there's now apparently two wallets. One wallet that was found at the scene, supposedly, and one wallet that was supposedly found in his pocket. Yeah, now, the wallet that was supposedly found in his pocket can now be found in the archives. The wallet that was supposedly found the wallet that was filmed at the scene of the crime has disappeared. We still have video footage of it, okay? People have had a great time trying to argue about whether it's the same wallet or two different wallets. And you can go either way on it, but I would suggest, like a lot of things, in this case, it doesn't matter which conclusion you come to. The important thing is these two wallets are virtually identical. And the stories about the two wallets are identical, that they had Oswald's ID and Heidel ID. And why in the world would an assassin leave his wallet at the crime scene? I mean, it beggars the imagination.
It certainly does.
And why wouldn't anybody have seen it at the crime scene? Instead it's just handed to a cop and said, "This is what I found," from a mysterious witness whose name is not obtained. Just like 20 mysterious witnesses that could have really cleared up what happened in the theater, but the list was lost, so we don't have it. This case is based on phony evidence. From top to bottom.
So this wallet was filmed by a TV crew that had shown up at the murder of the Tippit scene. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then it was shown on TV?
Yep, and that footage is on YouTube today.
Mm.
And you can see the photo examination for yourself if you go to YouTube and see my talk on Captain Westbrook and the Tippit shoot.
Right, and everybody really should watch that. That was a really great talk. So you've got. Well, do you feel like kind of them finding the wallet is the end of the basic scene that you want to paint, and we should go over these point by point? Or?
I think that's a good place to wrap it for now. Let's go back and push it any way you want.
Okay, great. So one of the more interesting things that you discussed in your talk was just the original ID that was given to even the description that was put out for the police to even look for Oswald. So do you want to we've heard forever that it was someone in Dealey Plaza had kind of seen him through the 6th floor window, but you kind of prove that's not correct with documents from Hoover and other people. Do you want to talk about that the ID?
Yeah, this is one of the things that got me really going on the whole Kennedy case in terms of writing about it as opposed to reading about it, because I was so incensed and so angry. And the only other person who had really picked up on this was Peter Dale Scott, who is a marvelous sleuth in his own right. There was an ID that was on the radio 15 minutes after Kennedy was shot. And it's over the Dallas radio. And it says the shooter was 5'10" and 165 pounds. And there's a little bit more to it, but that's the essential part of it. Now, I was really struck by that. They said it 5 more times. Where did it come from? It came from a fella named Herbert Sawyer, who was a detective on the scene. And he was guarding the back door of the depository to make sure nobody was running out from there without being checked first. They basically sealed off the building. This 5'10", 165, he was told this by a person. They said, "What do you look like?" He said, "Well, he's white, not too young, not too old, not too fat, not too thin, just kind of average looking." Okay. What was his name? I don't know. What did you do with him after you got this statement? Oh, I gave him over to one of the sheriffs. And do you know what sheriff? No. Did you ever see this man again? No. Was Sawyer implicated in this case? Unclear. Maybe yes, maybe no. Not that important. The important thing is this crazy ID. This ID came from an unknown man who was turned over to the sheriffs. Now, there's a fellow who claims to have been that unknown man, and that man is Howard Brennan. Howard Brennan was a pipe fitter, something like that, working man, and he claims to have seen the man, but the ID, one, doesn't make any sense, and two, if you go through the records, even J. Edgar Hoover didn't believe that Brennan had seen this guy. The ID doesn't make any sense. Brennan would have been looking up to the sixth floor. Okay, now maybe he saw somebody posing with a gun, maybe not. But the important thing is, you're not going to be able to tell whether the person's 5'10" or 165 pounds, looking through a window from the street. You know, you'd be lucky to even be able to see the gun, much less the person's face. If you saw the person's face, you don't see their whole body. You don't see how tall they are. You can't tell their weight. The one thing you can tell is the color of their shirt. But we don't have any of that in this description. That's the first thing. He's wearing a white shirt. He's wearing a blue shirt. But there's none of that. That's a phony ID. I wrote about it in my book at great length, but Brennan didn't see Oswald. And he didn't see anybody 5'10", 165 in the window. No. The 5'10", 165 description comes from a description of Oswald. There's only one that you see. Oswald was a smaller guy for that. He was 5'9", but more importantly, you know, when he died, he weighed 126. He would never weigh more than 135, 140. This 165 is simply too stocky a guy for Oswald. But where you do see it is you see it back in the Soviet Union. There's a very mysterious description of Oswald. It supposedly came from his mother. I don't believe it did. But it says 5'10" and 165. And you see this description drifting through intelligence documents. You even see it in Mexico City. There's two different sets of documents in Mexico City, and that's one set. Another set is completely different. This one describes Oswald as 6 foot, a husky, completely different description yet again. So this 5'10", 165 is an intelligence legend. Now, why all of a sudden are you seeing this intelligence legend being broadcast over the radio? Well, I would suggest that, whatever happened to Sawyer, whether it was a real person or a fake person, it got translated in a very odd way over the radio. And the other thing that's really interesting is all through the Warren thing, they know that Oswald was described as 5'10", 165. Did they ever think it was strange that the radio was basically repeating what was in the intelligence documents about Oswald? I mean, that's more than just coincidence. Something very strange has happened here. I personally believe that Sawyer was in the middle of it all. Sawyer wound up having to leave the police department in disgrace. He quit rather than being charged with perjury. That's yet another story. But so that 5'10", 165 description is, in my mind, completely phony and illustrates the intelligence fingerprints all around Oswald.
Okay, so you were talking about Sawyer You've talked about Hill. You've talked about Westbrook. Let's start with, maybe we can talk about kind of who you see as the core of maybe the people in the Dallas police who seem to be guiding events or know a little bit more than they should have. Can we? I found
start with Westbrook and Hill. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Those two guys.
Well, yeah. I'd like to let's talk about Westbrook because, and I especially want to hear what you know more about what he went on to do, because you said that he kind of went on to even be working with the South Vietnamese police, kind of in a very. We know the CIA used to do training for local police forces in the United States. That kind of became a scandal in the era of Watergate and the Church Committee. But we also saw that local police would end up going, presumably with the CIA training, to places like Vietnam, where they would train the police forces of those regimes over there. So do you want to talk about him and his background?
Well, let me start with what I think is the weakest argument first, which is what you just brought up, not because of any disrespect for you, but because we don't have a document proving that he was a liaison between the CIA and the South Vietnamese Police Department. This is all hearsay, and so it has the ring of truth, but I don't have the document, so I'm always kind of wary of making that claim.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But I will say this, Westbrook and Hill both approached this case in a very strange way. First off, Westbrook had no business being on the scene in the first place. He had about as much business being on the scene as I would, okay? And I was 11 years old at the time. He worked in, the personnel beat for the internal affairs for the police department. He's not. He has no experience being out there at crime scenes. None. He's not supposed to be doing that work. He's referred to him because he was a captain, but he's not supposed to be there. So he's not wearing a uniform, and he claims to have just been, caught up in events. He walked all the way from the police department to the 6th floor, and then jumped in a car and drove to the Tippit scene, then jumped in a car and drove to the theater. And Hill is in the same boat on that. Hill actually got to the theater, got to the depository within 20 minutes, and is like, you can see him in film. He's like leaping out of another officer's car and running upstairs. And so it's kind of problematic why these gentlemen are there at all. Hill is answering to Westbrook. Hill is not a detective, He's just not. He's not supposed to be in there. Now, of course, it was a chaotic scene, but how did he even know to go in there? The initial calls that went out are saying they thought the shots came from the overpass, not from the depository. That came a little bit later. So, and he went up there and, and charged up, to the top floor with great certainty about his approach. And you can see a picture of Hill leaning out the window, shouting to the police, to bring the crime lab up, And so I think, frankly, Luke Mooney claims that he found the shells, but I think that Luke deferred to Hill in this little operation here. And that it's entirely possible that Hill planted the shells and then said to Luke, look at this. I'll go out and call the, constables. And he did. And then within moments, Hill is screaming off, and so is Westbrook, off to the next scene, which, again, it's understandable, but they put themselves in leadership roles immediately at the scene. Hill admittedly lied to the Warren Commission in a couple respects. He claimed to have found an automatic shell at the scene, But he didn't admit it till the 1980s when they asked him if he was the person who called in the 1960s investigation. He says, "No, that wasn't me." He admitted it 20 years later, when there was no longer any heat that could be applied to him. Why he called it in as an automatic? It's not a mistake to be easily made at all, which I talked about at length as well. So the bottom line with Hill and with Westbrook is, why are they in leadership positions over and over again on the scene when they're not really supposed to be? And why are they giving false information and not admitting information like, hey, we found a wallet at the crime scene. Hey, it's Oswald's wallet. Why isn't he admitting it? And Bob Barrett, the FBI man, was asked about this, and he goes, Bentley called it in. Bentley was the guy who supposedly found it in his pocket. I'll get to Bentley a little bit later. And so we didn't want to, he apparently just didn't want to screw things up. Well, here's the most important investigation in history of the United States, to me at least, the assassination of President Kennedy. And they're fibbing about the most important evidence, whether or not there was a wallet that was found at the crime scene, and whether or not that wallet had the ID of Oswald and Nadell in it, and they're lying about it. Well, when Bentley, Barrett was asked a couple of years ago about Bentley claimed that he found it, the wallet in Oswald's pocket. He goes, "No, that's hogwash. That's just not true. I saw it with my own eyes, and that wallet was at the crime scene." And so here you had an FBI agent calling the guy who was the head of the polygraph, Paul Bentley, calling him a liar. And then you've got a situation where at the theater, there's a scuffle with Oswald, the arresting officer. And Jerry Hill is the guy who winds up with the revolver. And Jerry is claiming that there's a mark on the bullet that shows that Oswald tried to fire the gun and shoot the officer inside the theater. And then, it's the FBI who is called to testify to the Warren Commission. They go, well, actually, you know what? That's not true. There is no such mark on the bullet. So Jerry Hill has lied yet again about something really fundamental to the case, about whether or not Oswald tried to kill an officer in the act of being apprehended. So Hill is not trustworthy to me at all, and neither is Westbrook. But it gets a little bit worse, because at 5 o'clock, 5:30, Jerry Hill gets on national television. And he's the guy who proceeds, and he's good at telling the story, because he's a trained TV reporter, right? And he tells the entire story of Lee Harvey Oswald in the Soviet Union as a defector, and then marrying this lady, Marina, a Russian woman from Minsk. He's telling this to the entire world. And this guy's just, a beat officer working in personnel. And, somebody asked me, Jerry, how in the world did you get all that information? Because he's miles ahead of, ABC and NBC and CBS. And he's like, I got it all from Westbrook. Well,
Wow.
That's quite a thing. He says he got it from Westbrook about 3:30, and he tells the story at 5, and then he goes to his little church group at 6. And he pretends to be befuddled as everybody else. I mean, he's just changed the course of history by telling the world the background of the assassin, that background that, the major news agencies still were trying to catch up on. It's an incredible story, and I don't believe it. And I don't think there's any reason anybody should believe that Hill was anything but a witting player in this whole drama. And I think he was a witting player before it happened. I don't think this is just serendipity. I think this is part of a scheme to make sure that the right person is brought down.
Now, do we know what happened to? Do we know what happened to either of these guys? Kind of in the rest of their lives. I mean, I know it sounds like that Office of Public Security thing is a little not very hard. Do we know anything about kind of what happened to these guys after the fact?
Well, they certainly didn't. They certainly weren't disciplined for anything they did.
Right.
They certainly weren't punished. Westbrook was, put in charge of trying to figure out what happened to Jack Ruby. When in fact, one of the people who was helping hide Ruby's body in the basement before the shooting was this guy Kenneth Croy, the same guy who came up with the wallet at the crime scene. And they were there's people who believe that Jerry Hill, was in the car that picked up Oswald at 1:00. If Oswald ever, assuming that Oswald went back to his home and got his revolver, which is the story we've been told, because one of the numbers that the lady gave matched the car that Hill was in. But Westbrook assured everybody that it wasn't a Dallas police car that was involved in that. And
now this was this was when this was the owner of the boarding house where Oswald lived.
Right.
She heard the horn honk.
Exactly. But Westbrook never revealed that one of the numbers of the car that supposedly picked up Oswald was the very car that Jerry Hill was in that day. He didn't reveal his conflict of interest or anything like that. He never mention Jerry Hill's name. Westbrook left the force and went allegedly to Vietnam shortly afterwards. Jerry stayed with the force and had a pretty humdrum life. Occasionally interviewed. I really am very critical, frankly, of the research community for giving this guy such a big old pass. There was only a couple people who were tough enough to try to, get Jerry to give interviews. And Jerry did give interviews occasionally, and he was very evasive. He spent most of his time just saying, what a good guy he was, what good guys were on the Dallas Police Department. But he was very careful to not commit himself to a lot of facts. But one of the things that troubles me the most is the other fellow that I really look at very carefully is this guy, Paul Bentley. Bentley was with Hill in the balcony. He was one of the guys who hurt his leg so badly running down the stairs. Bentley was the head of the polygraph department. And Bentley was the guy who had supposedly found the wallet in Oswald's pocket, which I don't believe happened. Certainly the FBI doesn't believe it happened. And then Bentley was also the guy who interviewed Buell Frazier, Oswald's buddy at the Texas Depository, about whether Oswald had brought in a big bag. Frazier said, the bag he had was very small and couldn't possibly fit a rifle. Frazier was polygraphed that day. And apparently he got a clean slate because he was sent home without any charges that night. For the rest of his life, Bentley denied ever having polygraphed Frazier, even though other people in the team admitted it. And even though Frazier said I was polygraphed, they couldn't find any documents about the polygraph. And Bentley would never say a word about it. He said, I just don't remember anything about him being polygraphed at all. And Bentley, I think, was literally a bent officer. I think he was lying throughout. And I think those three, to me, are in the core of what happened in terms of framing Oswald as the suspect that day.
Now, what was the threat? I don't know, do you know about the confession they tried to get Frazier to sign or threatened him with?
Well, the problem with that story is it's apocryphal. It all comes from Frazier.
Ah, okay.
We don't have any documents. We have a lot of bluster about how, Will Fitz tried to get him to sign it, and he threatened to punch him, and Buell said, I'll punch you several times. I'll get some good licks in on before. It's all bravado. I'll tell you my problem with this whole piece of the story is that I think Buell Frazier was scared. And I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but I do like to tell it. It's quick. Buell Frazier and Oswald didn't have much in common. One of the things they did have in common is they liked to talk about life. Okay? They did. And Buell had a life. And he had what's called and Oswald, allegedly had a rifle, although I don't know which rifle it was. The rifle that Buell Frazier had was called an Enfield 303. What's so interesting is that at 2 o'clock the afternoon of the assassination, NBC picked up the story saying they found a rifle in the depository, and the rifle was an Enfield 303.
Mm.
And that's the moment where Buell Frazier just kind of disappeared from the map. He just literally, nobody knows where Buell Frazier was between 2 and 6 o'clock. Buell says that he was with his stepfather in the hospital, just left the scene of the assassination and went to visit his stepfather, who he hated, by the way. He had a terrible relationship with. And he was found there with him at 6 o'clock that night. But I don't think he was there at 2 o'clock. I think he was there with his sister, shuddering, saying, oh, my God, somebody's trying to frame me for the assassination of the president. What am I going to do?
Mm.
And I think they talked about it for an hour and a half. And then his sister went across the street when the cops were talking to Ruth Payne, who lived right across the street. And she engaged them in conversation and told them her little piece of the story, which she knew, which wasn't very much. But she didn't tell them where Buell was. And we've never had a satisfactory story from Buell where he was between 2 and 6 o'clock that evening. And I think Buell was quite rightly scared for his life. I think they made up that story, quite frankly, about him having a small bag. They didn't want to get caught up with knowing that Oswald had carried a gun, so they made sure the story went so that the bag was much too small for a rifle to be concealed.
Mm.
I think that's the way that played out. But it turned out that that story got run on Jerry Hill's old station. And then that got picked up by NBC, and then within an hour, they retracted the story mysteriously. Nobody knows where that story came from, and nobody knows how it was retracted. But we all know you can see it, you can hear it yourself if you listen to a full copy of the tapes of the assassination that day. This Enfield 303 story disappears right out of nowhere.
Interesting. And that's I guess that would be the third rifle that they heard about, because you have the Mauser. That was...
Right, the Mauser, the Enfield, and finally the King Cardine. Now, I'll tell you, just while we're chit-chatting about it, some people think that they found a Mauser on the 6th floor. I don't think they did. I think they found a Mannlicher the whole time. I think that there might have been some chit-chat among the officers with the personnel inside the building about the Mauser. Because, in fact, one of the heads of the building brought in a Mauser to show off a couple days before the shooting. So I think there might have even been some jiggery-pokery where people said, well, we found a Mauser, trying to get somebody else to say something about what they knew.
Mm.
Because, I don't think all the cops here were on the take by any means. There was just a few bent cops, and the cops are free, of course, to use information they pick up to try to get other people to talk by telling tips. So I think the Mauser story may have been circulated simply to see if somebody would cough up some more information about a Mauser, because they had heard a Mazur had been in the building that way. Nothing more.
Interesting. Sorry, where was I? Okay, so you want to, I mean, we've talked a lot about the two wallets, but do you want to talk about how the cover up more of that? Because it's interesting to figure out, even, nobody talked about that other wallet for decades and decades, and then suddenly it appears in Hosty's book and in, well, I guess the video is rediscovered. Do you want to talk about how this kind of came to the front and how that the initial wallet got lost, quote unquote?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Because nobody mentioned it for 32 years until Hosty stuck it in his book in 1995. I'm cynical enough to think Hosty put it in his book because he wanted to sell books, and he knew he had a piece of dirt, so he thought he'd insert it in there. I've never really completely known what to make out of Hosty, other than that I don't think he was in on it, the crime, but I think he knew more than he was supposed to know by his own admission. And I think he used that, he decided to release that little piece of information as a way to try to vindicate himself frankly in the research community, because the research community held him in very low esteem because he had lied in the past about Oswald and his relationship with Oswald, and the fact that he destroyed documents the day of the assassination, or the day of Oswald's death, supposedly at the order of his boss, who said, you got a note from Oswald before the assassination. Oswald, he'd gone by Oswald's, Mrs. Oswald and Mrs. Payne, and said he wanted to talk to Lee in the weeks before the assassination. And he was doing his job because, Oswald was a redefector to the United States. He had been arrested in New Orleans. It made sense for them to follow up and see what Oswald was up to, because he worked the subversive beat. Most of his people, curiously enough, were right-wingers he looked at, not left-wingers. But one thing I've thought about is that it's not impossible that he thought Oswald was a right-winger disguising himself. That's not all that important, though, at the end of the day. The important thing is that Hosty stuck it in his book, and that's when people started thinking about this wallet story really seriously for the first time. That film had always been around about these guys looking at a wallet, but they never considered the wallet that important until they realized that the wallet was allegedly Oswald's wallet. And they started talking to more cops, and the cops were willing to talk a little bit about what they knew about the wallet. And it all grew like topsy over the last 20 years, the wallet.
Now, there's one other character that you talk about you briefly talk about him in your talk, but then Don Thomas, another researcher, had kind of talked a little bit more and added a really interesting wrinkle about his station wagon being seen around the scene of the Tippit shooting. And I don't want to screw the story up. It's a long story, but do you want to talk about Mather?
Mather. Well, the Carl Mather story is a complete doozy. You got to keep in mind that the guy who did the footwork on it went on to become the mayor of Dallas. If you can believe it, a fellow named Wes Wise. Okay, so this is not exactly a not well documented story. This is a very well documented story.
Well, okay.
The way the story goes is this: that Carl Mather was friends with J.D. Tippit. In fact, the story is that Mather and Tippit were together at, I believe, Tippit's home that morning. Now, Tippit is assassinated 45 minutes after Kennedy, more or less. Somewhere between 1 and 1:15 in the afternoon. At 2 o'clock, a mechanic who used to be a cop, I might add, which makes sense when you hear what is about to happen, sees this guy in a red car parked near his garage, and he's looking kind of shifty. There's no reason for him to be there. So he walks up to him to try to talk to him, and the guy drives away. And because he drove away so suddenly, he wrote down his plates, the mechanic did. And then Wes Wise, the reporter who becomes the mayor, talks to this mechanic who used to be a cop, and the mechanic cop turns over the plates to Wes Wise. And Wes Wise does a run on the plates, and the make comes out to be Mather's car, which is kind of strange because Mather's car is a blue car, not a red car. But apparently the plates got taken off and put on this red car. And to top it off, the fella who, the mechanic cop who called in the plates, said, "I'll tell you right now, if you asked me who that guy was driving the car, I'd say it was Lee Oswald." But I guess that's impossible because he was under arrest at that point. That was right about the time Oswald got arrested. So the story goes that Mather lent his car, or his plates at least, to somebody who was like an Oswald kind of double. It's remarkable that they got the plates. And Mather was deeper in the story because now Tippit's dead. Mather and his wife go to Tippit home, and they are the ones that comfort Mrs. Tippit. And to make it even stranger, Mrs. Mather goes off and leaves Mr. Mather with the grieving widow. And the thinking is that Mr. Mather was needed to handle the poor, distraught widow, while Mrs. Mather went off to deal with stuff. Who ever heard of the husband being the one who'd stay and comfort the grieving widow? It's usually women comforting women, not this kind of thing. So it's kind of strange, to put it mildly. And it gets a little stranger when you think about where Mather worked, which was at Collins Radio. Collins Radio was deeply intelligence connected. In fact, they were the shop that made the radios that were used by the CIA. Collins Radio has a long military intelligence connection. So Carl Mather is a person of interest, and there's some. We're going to see a few documents hopefully this year about the Carl Mather story. I believe he was given immunity in order to talk to the House Select Committee of Assassinations at all. So we may learn a little bit more about that in October. But the Carl Mather story is fascinating.
And those have been held back for documents that... Yeah.
The interview with Mather, I believe, has been held back. So I think we'll get to see it in October. I don't know how much we'll really learn, to be honest. But maybe a little bit more than we now know.
That's interesting.
And Wes Wise has never let go of the story. But after he became mayor of Dallas, he just stopped beating the bushes the way he did in the years past. And I think it was because he felt hopeless. That's the way I heard it secondhand. He just felt like nobody was really interested in getting to the bottom of the case among those in authority who had power. So they really left it to the citizens of the research community to piece together all these jigsaw pieces over the last 50-odd years.
And when was he mayor? Just out of curiosity.
1970s.
Oh, okay.
Two-term mayor, as I recall.
Okay. So if are you still good to talk a little more?
Yeah.
Okay. If we talk about, I know when you made your talk the first question was, what was the motive for the Tippit killing? And I know that I just want to get your thoughts. I know in Joseph McBride's book, I haven't read the book, but I've heard him talk. He was saying that, he heard word that Tippit could have been involved in narcotics trafficking. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about Tippit himself, what you know, and then, what kind of, this is something I feel like you probably know about because you've worked a lot on police cases and CIA corruption cases, but, what was kind of the scene of the Dallas Police Department? What corrupting influences were there? We know Dallas was a kind of a horribly racist town. I heard something that only 1% of the African Americans in Dallas were registered to vote even in 1963. What were some of the forces at play kind of within the Dallas police and maybe with Tippit being involved in the same underworld as maybe not directly, but as Jack Ruby was part of just kind of the underworld of Dallas and how that interacted with the Dallas Police Department? Well,
it's funny. Kenneth Croy, the dirty cop I talked about earlier, who found the wallet supposedly. He supposedly, during the moments between Kennedy's assassination and the Tippit assassination, that hour, he was having lunch with his estranged wife at this place called Austin's Barbecue, which was a known place for the Bircher crowd and the Klan crowd. And Tippit worked security there. He moonlighted there. So he was familiar with that milieu, certainly. And I don't know anything about narcotics stuff. I don't know whether he was a clean cop or a dirty cop. I think he was a right-wing cop, for what it's worth. I don't know that he was in on the hit or not. I'm not at this point casting any aspersions on Tippit's character. My thinking, and this is just my thinking, is that I think Tippit was supposed to die. Some people, and I've thought about it, it might have been a busted-up operation, and they wound up killing him because things had gone wrong, okay? But in any case, the net effect of the Tippit assassination, as I said earlier, was to pull 100% of the cops to be 100% in terms of bringing down Oswald by any means, fair or foul. Because the cop is now dead, and it really heightened the contradictions and made an already incredibly crazy situation 10 times crazier. So that's my thinking, is that I don't know if Tippit was a good cop or a bad cop, but my personal hunch is that he was doomed to die. You are going to do in Houston in November. You're going to be part of the mock trial. Is that right? Yeah, Larry Schatz and I are going to do what I call the forensic evidence. We're going to examine the bullets and the shells, and the rifle, and all the minutiae. And Cyril Wecht, who's also an attorney as well as a pathologist, and Bob Tannenbaum, who was one of the HSCA attorneys, they're going to do their piece of the case that revolves around the autopsy, which is, a big subject and it also covers a lot of ground. And we'll be up against a prosecutor from Notre Dame, and we got a Texas judge. And the Notre Dame prosecutor is very motivated because his dad actually met Kennedy the night before his assassination in Fort Worth, or in Houston. And we'll be doing this in Houston. So somewhere out there is where they met. And so it's always been a big thing in their family. And we're all pleased to be working together. And at the same time, we'll be trying to really treat this as a very serious enterprise in terms of making sure we get the evidence right. My hope, frankly, is that we'll be able to convert the prosecutor and the judge by the time this case is over. I don't think anybody, only in the last 20 years have we had enough access to the evidence to show just how phony it is. Our predecessors in researching this case didn't have the access to the massive amount of documents we have now thanks to the Oliver Stone movie. Right. In case your listeners don't know, when the Oliver Stone movie got released, Congress was so outraged, and the public was so outraged, they wrote Congress. The Congress released like 6 million pages of documents have been withheld for decades on this case. So we know a heck of a lot more about this case than we did in 1991, which is when the movie came out.
Right. And even the files from the House Select Committee, I guess, which was kind of initially, those had all been even put aside for 50 years. So
that's right. It was a travesty. Every time you did an investigation, all you were doing was preventing the public and investigators from seeing the most important files.
And kind of, I guess that would be the opposite of looking back, the Warren Commission probably felt they made a huge mistake by releasing the volumes. And so that's the exact opposite of what they did, right, for the HSCA. They kept them
Well, it's funny. They did do 12 volumes for the HSCA as well, but I think you're right. I think they regretted releasing those volumes at the end of the day. They were in between a rock and a hard place. They had to do something to keep people quiet. Alan Dulles' thinking was, let's give them written documents nobody in this country reads anyway. And, tell you, Alan Dulles wasn't far from wrong. I am somebody who does love to read. And most people don't consider this kind of reading a priority.
Right. Is there anything else that you wanna add on to what we talked about the Tippit case? Is there anything we didn't?
No, I think we did it. I think we did a pretty good job covering it. There's no reason to go into minutiae. I think we hit the broad strokes. I don't think that people want to be dragged into the weeds. I want to keep the broad highlights in everybody's mind. 2 wallets of Oswald were found at the scene. One, supposedly at the murder scene of Tippit, and the other at the theater. That doesn't make a lick of sense. And why in the world would he carry Oswald and Hidell cards if he was going to deny killing the president? And, of course, the Hidell card was absolutely essential because the rifle that killed the president was ordered under the name of Hidell. Why would you create a paper trail that connected you to the assassination of the president and then deny it instead of taking credit in front of the whole world? It doesn't make a lick of sense unless you're being set up. And the same is true with the death of Tippit. He denied having anything to do with the death of Tippit, just like he denied having to do with the death of Kennedy, and I think he told the truth.
Right. I mean, there seems to be no obvious escape plan for him, right? There was not much money in the wallet.
No, and he didn't have a bus ticket. Now, the $54 question was, why did he go to the theater? And I don't think he went to the theater to hide, although that's a possibility. I think he went to the theater because he was supposed to meet somebody. And in fact, he had a half of a card of the place where his mother worked at Cox's in Fort Worth. He had half of the card in his possession, and I think he was supposed to meet somebody who had the other half. That's an old tradecraft thing. Oswald always wanted to be a spy, whether he was or not, is another thing. But he wanted to be a spy. I think he thought of himself as a spy. And who was he spying for is, one of the great questions. But I think he thought that he was working with, the U.S. government, whether it was FBI or, ONI or CIA. It doesn't really much matter. That's what he thought he was doing. I think he thought he was helping. And I think when he ran to the theater, he was trying to find his contact who he was supposed to meet in terms of any emergency and try to get some guidance.
And so your best sense of his role is basically just the absolute patsy. He was.
Yeah, I think he was an absolute patsy. I think he got completely set up. Why in the world would he be sticking around at lunchtime and why in the world would he run home to get his revolver? I mean, what kind of operation is that?
Uh-huh.
After you've killed the president, run home and get your gun? That's a little late, isn't it? and leave the rifle that ties you, and not even throw away the ID that ties you. I mean, none of it makes any sense. I think when you read the descriptions of his reaction as the evidence started dropping in on him throughout the day, he gets more and more and more ashen and less and less cocky.
Right. Yeah, no, some of those photos of him are pretty heartbreaking after you kind of see at the beginning he's very...
He's very, I stand on my rights. And he realizes the ground's been cut out from under.
Right. Well, it was, there was in one of those speeches by Fidel Castro where he talks about Oswald, he makes a point that if you do something like this, you either have a plan to escape, and if you're not going to admit it, you have a plan to escape, or if you do it because you're a fanatic, you're going to say, yes, of course I did it. So Oswald is definitely
He did neither. That's
right.
He did neither, and that's the tip-off. It doesn't make a lick of sense unless you've been set up.
Cool. Well, I think that's a good place to end. Yeah, no, we're all looking forward. I know there's a lot of people talking about the mock trial, so good luck with that. And thank you for talking.
My pleasure. It's really great to share one's thinking on a case this important and how it affects American history, and how I think in the decades to come we're going to put a resolution on this case in a good way.
Well, I hope so. It's definitely about time for that. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Bill. I hope that we can talk again.
Look forward. You take care, Dave.
Bye-bye.